Imagine a funeral where the smoke isn't just for the dead. A crowd gathers, drums beat, priests chant, and a widow stepped toward the flames. Was she honored, forced, or trapped by a system that left her no life to return to? Tonight, we're looking at one of the most controversial practices in South Asian history, sati. Before we continue, let's be clear. This episode does not glorify self-harm. We are examining a difficult historical practice to understand the society around it. The word sati is often used today to mean widow burning. Historically, however, the Sanskrit terms you'll find are sahagamana or anumarana, meaning accompanying or following in death. The word sati itself originally meant a virtuous woman, and it also names a goddess in Hindu myth. Another distinction, jauhar, the mass self-immolation of Rajput women during sieges, is related in spirit, but not the same as the individual rite we're discussing here. So how far back does it go? Despite modern assumptions, the oldest Vedic texts do not prescribe widow burning. In fact, a famous funeral verse invites the widow to rise from the pyre and return to the living. The practice only appears in the historical record centuries later. The earliest solid epigraphic evidence comes from the 5th or 6th century CE. For example, an inscription at Iran in central India dated around 510 CE, which memorializes a general's wife who accompanied him in death. From the early medieval period onward, references become more frequent. It's important to note that sati was never universal. It was region and class specific, more common among certain upper caste warrior and elite lineages in parts of Rajasthan, Gujarat, Bengal, and the Deccan. Many communities did not practice it at all, and some encouraged widow remarriage instead. Still, among Rajput aristocracies in particular, sati could be framed as the highest proof of loyalty and honor. Why did it happen? There wasn't a single cause. Think of a stack of pressures. First, honor ideology. In courts that prized martial valor and female chastity, a widow's accompaniment could be praised as heroic. Second, property and lineage. A widow's remarriage could threaten inheritance lines, and sati eliminated that risk. Third, the harsh reality of widowhood. Religious texts, like the later Dharmashastras, demanded lifelong austerity, restricted diets, plain dress, social stigma. For some women, the choice of the pyre, or being pushed toward it, came in a world that made survival as a widow extremely difficult. Finally, there was religious framing. Some medieval commentators promised spiritual merit for a woman who followed her husband into death, while others disapproved or were silent. The tradition was debated and contested even in pre-modern India. Eyewitnesses and travelers also described the rite. Al-Biruni, writing in the 11th century, reports both voluntary acts and coercion, noting that rulers sometimes tried to prevent unwilling widows from being burned. Ibn Battuta, the famous 14th century Moroccan traveler, saw public, ritualized burnings in coastal kingdoms and commented on the elaborate ceremony. Later, Mughal chroniclers noted imperial interventions. Emperor Akbar in the 16th century outlawed forced sati, required official permission, and tried to dissuade widows. Later emperors issued similar restrictions with uneven enforcement. Accounts vary, but a pattern emerges. Authorities oscillated between toleration, regulation, and attempted suppression. What actually happened during the ritual? Descriptions differ by place and time. Typically, there was the husband's pyre, priests performing rites, distribution of gifts, and, crucially, the public gaze. Some sources claim widows were drugged, pressured, or bound. Others portray calm, even celebratory departures. Both pictures likely occurred. What is consistent is that the rite was social theater, a performance of virtue and family honor before a community. And that makes the idea of choice extremely complicated. There are also moments of resistance. Court records and narratives preserve interventions. Relatives or officials pulling women back, widows who refused and lived, or cases where local rulers banned the practice entirely. These stories matter because they show that contemporaries argued about sati in its own time. Under the Mughals, bans on forced sati appeared on paper, but enforcement varied by province. In the late 18th and early 19th centuries, British officials in Bengal recorded rising cases, partly because they were counting more carefully. Indian reformers, most famously Raja Rammohun Roy, publicly condemned the practice. In 1829, Governor-General William Bentinck issued Regulation 17, abolishing sati in the Bengal presidency. Similar bans followed in Madras and Bombay. Under British law, it became homicide to assist. In independent India, the Commission of Sati Prevention Act of 1987 dramatically strengthened penalties after a notorious case that year. Today, assisting or glorifying sati is a serious crime. So what do historians agree on? And what myths should we drop? First, sati was real, but it was not ubiquitous across India or across castes. Second, it grew in particular aristocratic cultures where honor politics were intense. Third, coercion, social pressure, and ritual theater often blurred the idea of voluntary. Fourth, pre-Vedic roots are not supported by early scripture. The practice emerges later in the historical record. And finally, debates, moral, legal, and religious, existed inside South Asian societies long before colonial rule and continued after. So was sati's sacred duty, social coercion, or both? The honest answer is messy because history is messy. What's clear is that the rite sat at the intersection of honor, property, gender, and power, and that Indians themselves argued fiercely over it. If you want more forbidden corners of Indian history, the Thuggee stranglers, the siege of Chittagong and Jauhar, or the Aghori ascetics, tell me in the comments. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Forbidden History, and I'll see you in the next episode.